Welcome to Perspectives. Linda Wilk says she was a shy child growing up in Nebraska who first found her place in writing and then reporting on, of all things, law enforcement and the criminal justice system. From that, she says she now finds herself as Grant County's leading advocate for women and families facing domestic violence and other challenges. And today she is our guest on Perspectives. Linda, welcome, and thinking about that journey, we'd like to talk on Perspectives about how people got from where they are to here. Did you ever see yourself being an advocate, being on the front line of some of these issues when you were covering them as a police reporter?
Not initially. I think I really have to credit Judy Flannery, who was the predecessor of mine, because I always say Judy's the one that if she found someone that she thought could benefit Hands of Hope Women's Services, she would bring them on, and that's what she did with me. Because growing up, I had no idea about domestic violence. I had no understanding, and as I started to get more involved and cover more of it, I realized just how important it was to let people know, to educate people about it, and to break the cycle of violence.
Hands of Hope is what, for those in our audience who may not know?
Hands of Hope, we work on the prevention and intervention side. We run the Flannery Keel Home, which is a domestic violence facility for victims of domestic violence and sexual violence and stalking. We do crisis intervention work. We do prevention work in the schools, in the community, and in society, overall. So there's a lot to Hands of Hope. It's really looking at, kind of our mantra is, how can we provide a safe, stable, nurturing environment for everyone? So not just those that are victims, but for everyone in the community. Because we know if we break the cycle of violence, if we change the norms and attitudes about what domestic violence entails, we'll have a much better society.
20 plus years doing it, does it ever get daunting to you? It's like this problem never goes away. Probably in some ways, I don't know if it increases, but it's certain the depth of the range of things that you've encountered, I'm sure probably has changed you.
Yeah, and I think what keeps me going is I don't just focus on the bad. I don't just focus on the domestic violence intervention, the victims. I also spend a lot of my time on prevention. So, like right now, the last 5 years, we've been working with the State Domestic Violence Coalition through the Center for Disease Control on, again, how do we change those root causes of domestic violence? So how can we encourage dads to do skin-to-skin at the hospital? How can we encourage coaches to be better role models for the youth that they're coaching? So when you look at that side of things, it's a much brighter picture, and then that helps me, with the days that I'm really entrenched in victims work.
Well, let's go back to that small town in Nebraska, York, Nebraska. A lot of times people that are in this, we may think, they must have had something traumatic in their lives that led them to this kind of work, but at least in the biographical information you've given us, it's been very, very normal, ordinary, Midwestern life growing up. Is that right?
Absolutely. My parents are still married. They've been married 50 plus years, and loving home, very strong Christian home. No understanding, again, of domestic violence. Now, I can tell you years later, I can tell you that my sister, I realized many years later that she was a victim of domestic violence in more than one of her relationships. I can tell you my brother was very verbally and manipulated and controlled by his wife. But I didn't know that until I got into the field. I didn't recognize it before.
What would you characterize your childhood? We said in the introduction, shy, introverted, word that you probably didn't use way back when, but what does that mean for you? You just didn't want to seek out a lot of attention, or?
Yeah, I'm the oldest of three. Again, very strong family, but my mother was a homemaker. My father was a state trooper. So, you knew where you stood, where you were, you didn't cross certain lines. Not that it was abusive, but high expectations for how you should act, but low expectations for you as a young girl, what you should be getting into and doing. So very traditional, I guess is what I want to say, traditional roles. There wasn't an expectation I'd go to college. My parents, neither one did. My brother was a great athlete. He was a year and a half younger than me. He was the homecoming king. He was the prom king, all that. And I was, again, the very shy, introverted one that the most I did was had a paper route and was recognized by the governor for doing such good work delivering a newspaper. So, very
good.
shy.
There wasn't a future in that, so it's a good thing you shifted gears. Dad was a state trooper, so you had some exposure to law enforcement. Did he ever bring home some of the things he dealt with?
Not much. He, again, was very much when he was off, not working. And again, back then, he was working 2 weeks of days, 2 weeks of nights. So and I didn't realize how disruptive that must have been for him because he kept it pretty normal for us. But I think that's why I gravitated to law enforcement on the reporting side, because he intrigued me. I wanted to know more, but he didn't let us know too much. He kept the wall up, yeah.
You started working a little bit at your high school newspaper. Did that prod you to think about journalism when you went to University Lincoln, Nebraska?
Yeah, University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Yes and no. Again, being that shy, backward person, I decided that because someone told me, you should go into interior design, you should do business. And so I started there. And I almost shouldn't tell this about myself, but I started in the business field and had a professor tell me I had no business being there.
Why was that?
I don't know.
Oh.
But again, kind of shut me down. And so I kind of spun my wheels a little bit. It took me 5 years to graduate, but then somehow entered in that journalism area where I had interest and excelled. And so then thought, well, this is where I'm supposed to be. It was almost one of those things where if I could teach someone to believe in yourself, that would be one thing I'd want people to take away from this, time here is if you feel like you can do something, only you are the one stopping yourself many times.
I'm thinking that business professor who, as a professor, I never say those kinds of things because they're going to come back to haunt you someday. But that business professor maybe knew that you needed to take a vow of poverty, so that's why he went into journalism. What did you like about journalism? In my professional work, because before I came to Marion, I was in a small town in the Upper Peninsula, Menominee, Michigan. And I remember going there, and it was actually a daily, but there were 2 dailies. And some of the things I just treasured about that work is one time I used to cover everything again. So I covered the highway department, and they were really trying to get a road made a state highway because there wasn't local funds to really do the work they needed for that road. And so I wrote enough stories that they were able to get that a state highway. And they believed I did enough work because they gave me one of those small road signs made just for me to thank me. That kind of experience, it was a logging community, so going out on the logging, going out on the bay, on the water, and doing the fishing boats, and then coming to Marion and still working as a police reporter, I was able to, again, some great experiences, going up in a police helicopter, going on a drug bust. Of course, I sat in the van, but I was able to listen and hear. I probably shouldn't say that, but listen and hear that kind of work, and it just fascinated me. I really, truly enjoyed the time I was at the newspaper. Some people that you talk to about reporting, I know I talk to students a lot of times, all those things you just described repel them. It's like to see the good, bad, and the ugly of society. Yeah. They're not drawn to it. And I'm not saying you were drawn to all that. You were drawn to the whole range of things. How do you think that sort of set your views about a community and working and living in a community?
Again, the whole time I lived here, well, the first years when I was a reporter, I did see the underside, the undercurrent of the community. And it made me want so much more to do something. Back when I was a reporter, I got connected with probation, and I remember Jeff Scott and I had some late night conversations about the Boys and Girls Club, and about, at that time, Big Brothers Big Sisters would not take any kids on probation. And I just struggled with that. Who needs a big brother, big sister more than a kid on probation? And so we created, with Ed Breen and Alan Miller and a couple others, what we called the Telemachus Mentoring Program. And we were able to get some seed money for that, and that stayed in existence for quite a while. So that's kind of where my passion indirectly started. I think that's where the flame started, and then it just kind of went from there and continues.
You went from general assignment reporting to more focus when you came to the Marion Chronicle Tribune on courts and police. Were you surprised that you wanted to do that?
No, because again, my dad, I think, is what inspired me. That I really, in fact, when I was at that small newspaper in Menominee, it was someone that graduated, an alum from Nebraska, that called me and said, "I'm leaving, you might be interested in coming, and this is what you'd be doing." And that's what I wanted to do.
What did you see as a reporter as far as the public servants, the people who deal with this kind of thing in and out of day that maybe touched you?
Oh, how much they care. I mean, how much they truly dedicate their lives to doing the work they do. I mean, it's not a turn off the clock at the end of your shift kind of job. And, you know, they will persevere. I mean, I remember people like J.K., that he lived and breathed that work. Dave Homer, Dave Gilbert, you know, just Angie Haley now as chief. I could go on and on and on, and I shouldn't because I'll forget someone. But, you know, Amos Randall, I mean, they just were they were such dedicated servants to the work. And, I mean, you know, again, it inspired me. I can go on, you know, with the courts, the judges, the prosecutor's office. You know, there's just so many people that they care so much, and they are dedicated to do the best job they can do.
And one of the things that you probably observed, and I have observed also as someone who moved into Marion, is how much they love this community. You know, there's kind of a, you know, I think this exists to every community to some extent, but there's kind of a bash Marion kind of thing. And when you see the law enforcement, when you see the long-timers and their dedication, you realize these are the people that are making us better than we think we are.
Absolutely, yeah.
So how did you begin to think that maybe you would leave reporting? What were some of the factors?
The biggest factor is I met my husband. It's as simple as that. I mean, I intended to move to Marion. It was a Gannett paper. I figured I'd stay a couple years and then go to the next place because I didn't know anything about Marion, Indiana, you know. Then Mike Klein, he's the one that started. Former editor. He was working with me at the Chronicle, and he decided that I should meet Larry Wilk, my husband, and was pretty obnoxious about it, to be honest. He played softball with Larry at that time on their church league, and he would post pictures of their team, or he would kept asking me to come to church because he knew that I was a Lutheran growing up, and that's the church Larry went to. And so eventually, just to get Mike to be quiet, I said, okay, I'll go to church because I'm not going to a game. That would just be weird. And so I went, and we went to lunch, and kind of the rest is history. I mean, it just seemed like, again, I feel like that was God's thinking. And so when we got engaged, I thought, you know, I don't want to be a second shift person the rest of my time. If I'm going to stay in Marion, I want to, and I was starting to feel like I've done all I can do as a reporter. I was really feeling that drive that I want to make a difference. And you can make a difference as a reporter, but there's that huge line you cannot step over, that ethical line, and I wasn't about to do that. But I wanted, you know, I didn't know what I was going to do, but I wanted to get more involved. And about that same time, the current director left. And so that gave me the opportunity. I talked with Connie Rose, and she knew I had done some volunteer work, and I ended up in that role.
We're going to pick that story up in just a moment. We do need to take a break, so we'll be back on Perspectives with more from Linda Wilk. Linda Wilk's work with Hands of Hope certainly shows her the best and worst of life every day, and now we get to continue our conversation and find out how you came to Hands of Hope, which was originally part of Family Services Society.
Yeah, it still is.
Still is.
And it was originally called Women's Services. And so I first started there, like I kind of indicated earlier, with Judy Flannery, saying, hey, you know, could you write some stories about us? And then got intrigued through that, and then helped her start a court program with victims, and then did like her donation thank yous and just indirect service work, never directly working with the victims, because again, that would have been, in my opinion, too close to that ethical boundary that I didn't want to cross.
Since I've been a journalist too, I'm curious about what led you to think I can go from reporting on these people, writing their stories, to actually being an advocate, actually being, in some sense, a player.
It was, again, that pull. I can't tell you enough. It was two things. One is, if I'm going to stay in Marion, Indiana, if I'm going to get married and potentially make a life here, then I have to do something more fulfilling than I felt like I, at that point in my life, was doing. I needed to give back. You know, I felt like I'd taken all I could take, and I wanted to give back. And then the other was, that's just where I felt I needed to be. It was a drive I had. I can't explain it any other way.
No, you alluded to God earlier,
Yes.
and we may as well say
Yes,
that
yeah.
you look back and you
Yeah.
find those threads and you say providence is involved here.
Absolutely. I mean, just from the standpoint, meeting my husband, he's from Michigan, I'm from Nebraska, and
here
met
you are.
him here, and then to get engaged, 6 months later, get a new job, and in a month after that, get married. How many people can say that? That it would happen?
Well, you're amazingly positive after 20 plus years of dealing with this. What are the dimensions of the problem of domestic violence? And we're not just talking about women's services anymore,
Right.
we're talking about families. What are the dimensions of that both discourage and encourage you as you look at it?
The depth of the problem and the fact that people always ask, well, is it better? What are the numbers? Numbers can be twisted. I could sit and tell you that we have this many more than we had or this many less, but that doesn't really tell you the truth. What I see is the disrespect among people that say they love each other, the way we talk to each other, which then leads to the way we think we can physically hurt each other or sexually or financially hurt each other. So, again, it's the name calling, it's the vulgar descriptions of the person you say you love, or it's how you treat your children, or even how you treat your coworkers or the neighbors that you live around. And the way you're modeling, what I always try and say is we have to remember that the way we are out in public and the perception people have of us, that's going to determine many times domestic violence in children's lives. If my husband and I are constantly at each other's throat, yelling, screaming, hitting, kicking, what are my girls seeing? They're seeing that that's the way mom and dad act. So when I get into a relationship, if it starts to happen, that's just a natural progression of the relationship, and that's what I should expect. I don't want that for any of my girls. I don't want that for anybody in society. So how do we stop that? Well, again, it goes back to taking a look at ourselves and how are we acting? So what's the depth? I mean, you can see it in any community you go to. It's how people talk, how people interact. And then it even goes deeper to what you see on TV, what you see on social media, the bullying that takes place on social media, the things that you would never say in person, but you feel that you have a right somehow to say, or you feel braver saying because it's on social media. So, I think they say 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 or 5 men at some time in their lifetime will be a victim of domestic violence. I want to turn that around so that, ideologically, I'd love there to be a time where domestic violence, no one knows what that means because it isn't in our society anymore. Will that happen?
Do you have any armchair experts in your life who think they can explain the issues you deal with simple answers?
I don't think so. If there are, I'd like to know.
What I mean is sometimes people would say, well, this is all in economics.
Oh,
if you fit the
sure.
economics, you could fix this.
Oh,
or this is a substance abuse problem. And sometimes I wonder, and you're far more expert than I am, if we're always looking at the symptoms and not the cause.
And that's where we're trying to change it. You hit the nail on the head, because you can say it's because of substance abuse. You can say it's because of unemployment. You can say all these excuses, but if we don't delve down to the root cause, which again to me goes back to what is your norms? What are you allowing in a relationship? What are you allowing in your workplace? Are you allowing negative conversations? Are you allowing negative behavior? Or are you saying, again, it goes back to that coaching of kids. Todd Law is my girls' basketball coach. He is such a good role model. He focuses on God first. He's an inspiration to those girls. That's the kind of coaching we need. We don't need, I'm going to yell and scream at you until you understand the role that you need to play. Maybe that works in the moment, but is that going to work down the road when they're on their own? So if we can get to changing our thinking, then we can get to the root causes, then we can stop domestic violence.
When you look back on those 20 plus years and you're still at it, any high spots, any bright spots you say, we made a dent here, this was new dimensions, or individual stories?
I can tell you that when I first started, nobody wanted to talk about domestic violence. Churches didn't want to hear it, community didn't want to listen to me. Not that they were rude, but they weren't inviting me in. Now it's not uncommon.
Why is that, do you think?
Awareness. I think the more that you talk about it,
I mean, why did you think
oh,
that
people
they didn't want to?
They didn't want to talk about it.
We're afraid of.
We're afraid. Yeah, it's something that doesn't happen in our community. You know, it happens in low-income homes, or it happens in this other area, but not here. You know, and I think as a society, and unfortunately, I think we've gone to the other extreme, where now it's almost normalized, where again, it's so acceptable that people are like, well, in fact, we'll have victims say, I didn't have it as bad as my mom did. You know, well, that's not good. You know, it's not good that your mom was hospitalized and you weren't. But so, you know, there's different aspects. Highlights, I try not to focus on any one individual client. Most times we don't know the outcome of the clients. Sometimes we do. I've had clients call me and credit me for their success, and I always let them know it had nothing to do with me. They're the ones that made, you know, the strides. We just gave them the tools to help them do that.
What are those tools? Because I don't want to get too specific, and obviously you can't disclose everything, but when you find out about a case, what happens next? What does Hands of Hope do? Hands of Hope,
we aren't always at the front line because there's an advocate at the police department, sheriff's department, prosecutor's office. We're kind of the support system for a victim. Now, we can be the front line. If they need safe shelter, we can immediately bring them in right from the scene of law enforcement. Right at, you know, the scene, law enforcement can bring them in, and they can stay with us, and we can provide them with safe shelter, case management, support groups, individual therapeutic counseling. That's one of the big keys. If we can get a victim to start into individual therapeutic counseling so they can start to take away, you know, kind of peel away that onion of all the trauma, because it may be that one incident that brought them, but chances are there's a childhood abuse in there. You know, there's other triggers that have happened that have brought them to this. So we have those services. I have an outreach advocate. So maybe they don't need safe shelter, but they need assistance with a protective order. They would like assistance with safety planning. You know, whatever it is a victim needs, that's where we want to be for them and meet them where they're at. Again, on the prevention side, we want to make sure we're educating the community, the kids, you know, the schools. We want to be working to make that change, that norms change in our community.
Well, this is too long to unpack, but we're going to try. You look at all this time, and where are we going with this problem in Grant County in particular?
Where are we going? See, that's where, again, I'm going to keep bringing it back to prevention. I'm going to keep bringing it back to the big picture work. Right now, I'm working in my neighborhood. My neighborhood's not really Central Marion, but pretty much, or kind of. We have a neighborhood park, and it's been neglected for years. And I've had some naysayers that say, you're never going to turn that park around. But if I can provide a safe, secure environment for children, if I can, you know, with neighbors who are helping me, turn that park into a place where people want to congregate, then we're driving out the drugs. We're driving out the negativity, even the domestic violence, because the children are feeling safer. The parents are feeling, you know, more. And we're, as a neighborhood, we're checking on each other. And when you're checking on each other, drugs in particular, they don't want to stay, you know, where they can't be underground and hidden. Domestic violence, you know, a lot of times abusers don't want to be called out. So if they know that the neighbors are more likely to call the police, they're not going to be as likely to stay there, or they will seek out or get the help that they need, which is ideal.
So in our closing seconds, it sounds like really the future increasingly is proactivity rather than always reacting to crisis.
Absolutely. If we can get to that proactive place, that's where we need to be. It's important to have the reactive piece, but proactive is where we need to be.
Well, you've been on the front lines for a long time, and you're not that shy anymore and introverted because you're an advocate for many people who need your help services. Thank you very much, Linda Wilk.
Thank you.
From Hands of Hope. Well, Perspectives is about the stories of Grant County and people like Linda who are making a difference. If you know someone you'd like us to meet, email us at wiwutv@nwest.edu or send us a note to WIWUTV, 4201 South Washington Street, Marion, Indiana 46953. I'm Randall King. Thank you so much for joining us.